Welcome to One Mind Zen. Tonight's Dharma talk is given by Maitri.
We just had a wonderful moment of together action. Just sitting here, breathing in the same Zoom workspace air, sharing the same silence. And as one son mentioned, we had a time change, and time change represents one thing to me: springtime. And with springtime, I find myself kind of going back to the basics, those basic seeds of the Dharma that we plant in the springtime. Hopefully, they grow throughout the year. So here I'm going to turn back a little bit to the very basics of our Zen philosophy. Uh, Oddly enough, my inspiration after Unsan asked me last week if I could teach the Dharma talk this week, I don't know why, but it popped into my uh, YouTube feed, an old 1960s song from Gene Chandler, Duke, 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 Duke of Earl, 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 Duke of Earl. Anyway, you probably know the song. And I thought, Dukkha, that's about as basic as it gets. So that's what I'm going to talk about, because that's where the Buddha began. And if it's springtime and we begin anew, then I'm going to start where the Buddha started. So the Buddha started with dukkha. And he didn't start with anything mystical, nothing really ontological about our role in the cosmos. He started with our reality that we face every day in life. Something we all know very intimately, because we too experience it. There is suffering. Dukkha. Life rubs. Life pinches. Life disappoints. In plain modern English, we might even say life sucks. It's not a flaw in us. It's not some inherently human trait that just says you have to suffer. It's just a simple part of being human. But the surprising thing we learn in our practice is that while suffering is natural, it's not essential to our existence. We can learn to live without it. It's not built into the hard drive of who we are. It's just the box that our hard drive comes in. And if we fully unwrap it, we can throw the box away. We can throw the suffering away. Some of you know that I spent several years studying Theravadan Buddhism at a couple of Sri Lankan temples in California. And I had a really good Sri Lankan monk. He had a PhD in Pali studies. He was really smart. You could ask him a word in Pali, and he would dig into it and give you all the background of where it came from and how it was used and all kinds of things. So he was a brilliant man. But he asked me one day, he said, Tom, what do you think is the most important of all the Four Noble Truths? And I sat there for a little while. And see, in Theravadan, they don't have koans where the teacher asks you a question and the student responds. This was an honest question he was asking me as a student. No trick to it. Just what was the most important of the Four Noble Truths? And I stewed on it for a little while in my head, kind of quiet. And I said, I think it's probably the fourth, the Noble Eightfold Path, because that teaches us how to live a life free of suffering. And he said, practically speaking, you might be right. But philosophically, everything begins with the first. There is suffering. Because that's the whole beginning of the conversation. The whole beginning of the Buddha's teachings is that realization there is suffering. And we as human beings naturally want to suffer as little as possible. I think that's our human nature. Sometimes we call it hedonism and we just go looking for happiness and pleasure. But the reality is, we just don't want to suffer. And the Buddha wasn't being a pessimist by telling us there is suffering. He was being a realist. And honesty was the Buddha's only way, his only doorway for us to find the freedom from suffering. So in what turned out to be one of his first sutras, one of his first teachings in the Dhamma Chakkapavatana Sutta, also in English, drop the Pali there, this setting the Dharma wheel in motion. The Buddha described it like this. He said, birth is suffering, aging is suffering, death is suffering, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair, those are all suffering. Association with what is disliked is suffering. Separation from what is liked is suffering. Not getting what one wants is suffering. Here in this sutta, the Buddha is describing life as we actually experience it. We're all born, we all suffer, in a nutshell. He's describing life as we really experience it, not as we wish we did, but just as it really is. And so the whole of his teachings, the whole of the Dharma, is a response to that first insight that he had. But if suffering has a cause, it can also have an end. The Buddha described in Pali, nibbana. In Sanskrit, we say nirvana. In English, we use the nirvana word as the end of suffering. And in the Pali Canon, in Udana 8.3, he says this: there is, monks, an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned. If there were not this unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned, no escape from the born, become, made, condition would be possible. But it is possible. In other words, the Buddha was teaching us suffering arises because of causes and conditions. It's a made thing. And what is made can be unmade. Nirvana is not a destination. It's not at the end of a long road when you finally get there to the pearly gates or whatever it is that you think opened up into nirvana. That's not it. Nirvana is the ease that remains when we stop holding our breath and stop gripping what is mine. And the door there is wide open. We just have to go through it, like those Dharma gates we talk about, like that gateless gateway. There's no gate there. We can go right through it. We just have to realize. So if the door to freedom from suffering, is wide open, why do we keep stubbing our toes on that same 3-inch curb of suffering? It's because we're caught in this great paradox. We want the world to stay still, and they want there to be a me for it to stay still for. So we struggle with impermanence because the world doesn't stay still. Everything changes. In the Anicca Sutta, the Buddha reminds us that the world is a kaleidoscope. Everything is shifting, vibrating, falling away. I like to think of that when I was a little kid and I'd look through the kaleidoscope you'd have, and you just turn the wheel a little bit and the colors and the little beads inside the front of it would move, and everything, it was different nearly every single time you turned it. That's life. Everything is shifting, vibrating, falling. So it slides across that screen in front of our eyes. But we don't like that. We want things to stay the same. We're resistant to change. The Buddha likened it to grabbing a handful of water and then screaming at it to stay in a cube. But it doesn't. The water doesn't stay in a cube. Suffering isn't the change, it's the friction from us grasping onto it. We're demanding permanence from a world made of sand. I like to think of it as a sharp blade, a knife. My wife is really good at sharpening the knives in our house, and I have to be careful when I reach in the drawer because they're always really sharp. But I like to think of it as a sharp knife. And if you hold that sharp knife in your hand and just let it rest there, you're fine. You can pick it up, take it away. Somebody else can pick it up, take it away. No problem at all. But if you grip that blade and say, it's mine, you're going to cut yourself. If you grip it too hard, you cut yourself. If somebody rips it away, you cut yourself. You suffer. Why? Because you gripped it. Because you said, it's mine. And once you think it's mine, it's going to change. And you're going to suffer. So then we have to ask ourselves, according to the Buddha and according to our Zen teachings, we have to ask ourselves, who's doing the grabbing? Who's grabbing onto it? This is where we trip over the ego. In the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, the Buddha looks at the body, the feelings, the thoughts that we all have, and says, this is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. We spend our entire lives defending, preserving, polishing this idea of me. I'm a doctor. I'm a lawyer. I'm an accountant. I studied for so many years. I own this beautiful home. Whatever. I. We define ourselves with I. And in the Western culture, it's one of the first things we do when we meet somebody. Hi, what's your name? Hey, I'm John. Hey, John, what do you do for a living? That's like one of the first things. Like, that's your identity, right? So we spend our whole lives defending this whole idea of a me. When we realize, as the Buddha did, that I am not any of these things, we realize that the self is just some kind of story we're telling in the middle of a constantly changing world. When we realize that, something radical happens. The world stops feeling like a personal attack on me, and we realize there is no me to be attacked. And if there is no fixed target, these arrows of life have nowhere to land. We stop trying to fortify this ego and realize we're the wide open space the wind is blowing through. Suddenly, there's room to breathe. Maybe we stop suffering so much. We realize it's not important because it's not directed at me. It just is. Centuries after the Buddha talked about suffering, and he talked about impermanence and grasping these causes of suffering, the great Mahayana philosopher Nagarjuna, he put it this way: whatever is dependently arisen, that is empty. That's explained to be empty. Things don't exist as islands off by themselves. They're based on conditions. Because suffering depends on our clinging, our grasping, and on ego, our ego sense, our sense of self is so strong. But because our suffering is based off of these things, it has no fixed essence. Essence, going back to that Latin word esse, uh, being. It has no fixed being. And so it's not who you are. It's just a weather pattern. It's just a cloud that came over. It's just a hurricane in the ocean. It's not about me. It's not about my house being washed away. It just is. It just exists. Unsan loves the Vimalakirti Sutra, and I know why. In chapter 9, this is a great one. Chapter 9, 31 bodhisattvas give this beautiful intellectual explanation of non-duality. Then they ask Vimalakirti, hey, buddy, what's your take? What does Vimalakirti say? Nothing. He stays silent. That silence is his teaching. The moment the mind stops dividing reality into me and it, or pain and pleasure, suffering has nowhere to land. In our own tradition, we often hear the challenge used by Zen Master Sung San. Show me your original face before you were born. He wasn't looking for a description of our soul. He was pointing to the mind before thinking. Before this story of poor me really starts. That don't know mind that he talked about cannot suffer because it's not trying to be anything. The great Zen master, kind of the father of our tradition, Linji, was this shock and awe iconoclast. And he put it even more bluntly. In one of his teachings, we kind of use as a koan, he spoke of a true person of no rank who was always going in and out of our own faces. When a monk asked him, who is this true person of no rank? Linji didn't give him a lecture. He didn't offer a hug. He just shouted, the true person of no rank, what a dried shit stick he is. It sounds irreverent. That's kind of the way our Zen tradition is. But it's the ultimate medicine, according to Linji. He isn't saying your Buddha nature. What he's really saying is your Buddha nature is not some holy perfume thing hidden in a cloud. It's right here, right now, in the grit, the mess, and the shit stick reality of life. In our Korean Zen tradition, we have this Wadu, which is kind of the Korean version of a koan. We have this Wadu who is dragging this corpse around. When we realize that the me we worry about is just a corpse being dragged around by causes and conditions, the burden stops. The true person isn't the corpse. It's the one doing the dragging. And that one is free from suffering. The Buddha didn't ask us to believe in the end of suffering. He asked us to practice it. When we see impermanence clearly, when we stop polishing the shit stick trying to make it gold, suffering falls away. Not all at once. Maybe for just one breath. But that breath is nirvana.